Hey, everybody. Just wanted to kind of set the table historically here with this episode for those of you who may not be super familiar with Mormon fundamentalist history. Wanted to make sure there was no confusion here. So, in the early parts of the fundamentalist movement, once that becomes a movement, we see that there's a council that's set up in southern Utah, consists of 7 men. Later, there would be a split in that council, and then there would be another council up along the Wasatch Front, kind of up around Salt Lake in that area. So, for the most part, as we talk about the council, we're going to be talking about that council up around Salt Lake. It's often referred to as the All Red Group. Just kind of keep that in mind that most of the time that's the council we're referring to. I just didn't want any confusion. If you want more information on how that all came to be, I would strongly recommend that you go listen to episodes 82, 83, and 82, 83, and 134, and those should give you kind of a fuller picture of what's going on. So again, when we refer to the council here, for the most part, not always, but the vast majority of the time, we're talking about the council up around Salt Lake, or the All Red Group. With that, let's just go ahead and let's just jump right into our conversation. Dude, we're going to talk about some stuff today. And this one here is, I think, going to fire some people up because the man himself is surrounded with a little bit of controversy. And we're going to give some historical context here. Now, before we start, I do feel like it's fair that we make mention that both you and I have benefited from the Joe Thompson priesthood line.
Yeah.
Which we're going to talk about. And so, in the interest of being transparent, I want to make it clear that yes, I have benefited in priesthood ordinances from that line. However, I'm going to be very careful on what I say here because I do want to get down to the bottom of some things. So even though I have benefited from that, I'm going to do my absolute best to be impartial here as we talk about this so that we can get down to the bottom of things. Because I think it's important in matters of authority that we really dissect these things out. And I think likewise, I think we would be remiss also if we didn't talk about authority versus power when it comes to priesthood.
Okay, so where do you want to start?
Let's start with who Joe Thompson was.
Well, I personally consider Joe Thompson as a mentor.
You knew him personally.
Yes.
Okay.
And Joe Thompson was part of the council in the All Red Group, also known as the AUB, from the 1950s till about 1993.
Right.
And he was a part of a group of men that were called by Joseph Musser in either 1953 or 1954.
So he was acquainted with Musser personally.
Yes, he was.
Okay.
And he told me that in Joseph Musser's later life, he acted as a chauffeur for him, driving him to and fro. And at the time that he was called, he was 27 years old, if I recall correctly.
He was 27 years old when he was the chauffeur for Joseph Musser.
Yes.
Okay.
As also when he was received his ordination from Joseph Musser.
Okay. All right. And let's just, for the sake of being clear here, right? We want to treat these things lightly, but I think it's also important that we call it out. When you say ordination, you mean second anointing.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. All right. So he directly receives the second anointing under the hand of Joseph Musser.
I don't know if it's directly,
but it's under his authority.
It's under his authority.
Okay. All right.
It could be that he was directly, but I never asked that detail.
Okay. All right. Good enough. So let me ask you this then. Again, in the interest of being fair, if you don't know for sure whose hand he received it under, how are we sure that he received it?
I don't think you can be sure other than
what he purports.
Than what he purports, and quite frankly, when he told me the story, I felt he was telling the truth.
The Spirit bore witness.
Yes.
Let me ask you this. Were was the AUB at that time ever putting men on the council who hadn't received their second anointing?
And by that time, you mean in the early 1950s?
Yes.
I don't know if I can answer that, but I do know that the original members received it,
Okay.
according to their own testimony.
Okay. All right. Good enough. Yeah, that's all I was curious about is what kind of record we had there. But look, at some point when it gets down to priesthood claims, I mean, look, we have one priesthood claim that is kind of in regards to what appears to be a woman having her regrets about not marrying the prophet, right? So I'm willing to be open to all those things. I was just kind of curious more than anything else. And you're right. I think given the time period we were in those days where you were trying to keep the church and the government off your back, record keeping was not just not encouraged, it was kind of discouraged in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, I would say that.
Because you didn't want to be giving fuel to the authorities as they're coming after you, and these types of ordinances and plural marriage went hand in hand in those days.
Yes, and I'd like to make a point that since this was in the period of 1953, 54, if someone can correct me on that as to the exact year, but that was also the time when you had the raid on Short Creek,
Right,
Arizona, and previous to that, you had a raid on polygamous leaders that took place in 1944.
right, absolutely.
So definitely, I don't think that they would be willing to volunteer a lot of information.
Right, yep. And that's what the historical record does bear out, right? We do
Hmm.
have exceptions to that rule, like during post manifesto polygamy in the LDS church. The apostles did keep a journal simply because there was this feeling that at some point all those things would come back together, right?
Hmm.
And you'd have to rectify that with records. But it doesn't necessarily surprise me that we don't have a written record somewhere of that, given that if somebody was to read something that said second anointing, so and so got it, you could pretty much guarantee that they were most likely in those days engaged in some sort of fundamentalist activity. So they would be very careful as they went forward not to disclose that.
I would like to say that we're not entirely bereft of record on that.
Okay.
We do have the Joseph Lyman Jessup Journal that mentions aspects of the second anointing,
Okay.
referring to him and his wife. And some have argued that he did it contrary to Rule and Allred's advice and things of that nature, but there's no evidence to purport that that was the case. And to me, the fact that it does date back to either 1953, 54, actually gives it a lot of weight.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. So was Joe raised Mormon? Was he a convert to Mormonism? What was kind of his background?
He was never a member of the church, the mainstream church.
Really? So he comes in cold straight to fundamentalism.
Right. His mother, her name was Mary Anderson,
Okay.
and his father's name was Orlando Thompson.
Okay.
Orlando Thompson was from South Africa.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, his mother, his father died when he was just a baby, if I recall. And his mother, when she remarried a man by the name of Kilgore, that being the last name, who happens to be the actual father of Lynn Thompson, who later became the president of the AUB.
Interesting. Okay.
But anyway, he actually told me a story that if it hadn't been for his mother, he probably would have grown up being a Catholic, and that was because when he was a little boy, his mother was having a hard time making ends meet as a widow, and he says that she put him in a Catholic a
Orphanage.
convent
Okay.
to be taken care of. And when she felt she had better control of her ability to take care of him, she went to go get him, and they were reluctant to give him up to her. So she went and took him
Oh, wow.
and took him away from there.
So we could be talking about Joe Thompson as a Catholic theologian.
Right,
Had his mom not been a
right,
little vociferous in getting him out of there.
right.
Interesting. So how does he encounter Mormonism?
Well, I believe through his mother. I think she was. I'm not entirely sure, but I honestly believe she had ties with fundamentalist Mormonism at that time, and so he grew up as a fundamentalist from pretty much the
Okay.
inception.
All right. Interesting. Okay. So when does he join up with like fundamentalism as we would know it? Is he around? Is he active during the times of the Short Creek raids, that sort of
Oh
stuff?
yeah, he was.
He was active.
Um, he actually lived in Short Creek for a time,
Okay.
and he had his first wife there, if I recall, while still at Short Creek, and he was involved in the United Effort Plan
Yep.
as a young man. As a matter of fact, in my dad's stepfather's journals, he mentions him, as part of that community already. And that Joe, I think, and Joe Thompson at that time would have been about 22, 24.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken, it was around 1943. So I guess that makes him like 21 because he was born in 1924.
Okay. All right. So when does he start to become acquainted with Ruin Allred?
Well, I would say pretty early on. I don't know exactly when to be exact, but uh,
Because Ruin wasn't living in Short Creek, right?
no, he
Ruin
wasn't.
was living in Southern California, if I'm not mistaken, for a while, and was Musser's personal physician, right?
I'm not too sure about that
Okay.
myself, but I do know that Rulon was acquainted with the fundamentalists. See, a lot of that, what I'm telling you, is right out of the journal of my dad's stepfather,
Sure.
a man by the name of George Calmar, and he writes in there speaking about Rulon Allred, and he mentions Joseph Thompson as well. Now, at the
Okay.
time, Joseph Thompson would have been 21 years old, and Rulon would have been, at least 10 years older
Right.
or more.
Okay. All right. So I'm trying to get the feel for when Joe kind of throws. And again, I got friends on both sides of this, so please know I'm not trying to stir up any controversy here. I'm just trying to examine the man's life. So how does he become acquainted with Ruin then? Do we know that at all?
I think, I don't know, no, I don't know that, but I do know that he was already engaged in meetings with Rulon Allred through Joseph Thompson, through Joseph Musser, excuse me.
Okay. All right. So he probably meets him through Musser, right? He was acquainted with Musser. And then he comes up north, so to speak, from Short Creek with Allred and those guys. And it's at that time that Musser passes along the authority or second anointing.
I'm not positive of whether he comes up north at that time.
Okay.
That's not part of my recollection as to when he made the move or anything like that.
Okay.
But I do know that he was aligned with Joseph Musser
Okay.
around that time. And he told me honestly about that they had a controversy regarding one of Joseph Lyman Jessup's daughters being married without the knowledge of Joseph Lyman Jessup. He apparently had a 15-year-old daughter that was married without his knowledge.
That's a problem.
And it created a controversy that involved Joseph Musser, Joseph Lyman Jessup, where they went down and argued that with the Short Creek Council.
I see. I see. Okay. All right. So once the AUB is established and going, what kind of callings does Joe hold inside the AUB?
He's in the he's in the council,
He's on
the
the
presiding
council.
council, yes. Can I have a break?
Yeah. Yep.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good. Okay, so I'm going to ask a few questions here about Joe Thompson's ministry while he's in the AUB, because oftentimes you can get a feel for someone based on what it is they feel like the Lord's put on their hearts, right? So while he's on the council, what seems to be his big push in terms of, like if we look at the LDS Church, some presidents of the church have been all about the Book of Mormon, right? We're going to
Mhm.
flood the earth with the Book of Mormon. Others, it's been temples. We're going to build temples like nobody's business. Did Joe have a specific thrust that you can look back on and say, this was really important to Joe, and this is where he spent a good portion of his ministry at?
Yes, I don't know if I can actually speak to, the entirety
Sure.
of his tenure in the council, but I can say that personally, with my personal experiences with him, his big push was the fullness of the priesthood,
Okay.
and he called it the fullness. That was generally how he referred to it.
Which is another it's
Yes,
a
it's another synonym
phrase
for
for
the
the
second
second
anointing.
anointing. Yep.
Yes.
Okay. And when you say his, that was one of his big thrusts. In which way? Like,
He saw it as being absolutely necessary for preserving the earth.
okay,
And what he told me once was what he said to me is that the priesthood, the prophecy of Malachi that we read about in the before the great and dreadful day of the Lord, he shall send forth Elijah, who shall turn the hearts of the children,
to the father.
and then
Yeah.
yeah, and then we have the Pearl of Great Price version where Moroni comes and tells Joseph Smith that same prophecy, and he says it three times, but each on the last time he adds
Right.
stuff to it, and where it makes the mention of, if it were not so, the earth would be utterly wasted at his coming.
Right.
So he saw it as imperative
Okay.
that this has to be on the earth at the time of Christ's return.
Okay. He was pretty instrumental about getting the temple built down in Mexico too, wasn't he?
Oh, yes, very much so.
Which would make sense because those two things would absolutely go together. And so
May I say something
yeah,
about
absolutely.
why he was involved in Mexico to begin
Yeah,
with?
absolutely.
When Joseph Musser was still alive, the man that was in charge of counseling with saints in Mexico, and by saying that, I'm talking about uh, what is known as Colonia Industrial in
Okay.
Ozumba, state of Mexico.
Right.
Now, Colonia Industrial means industrial colony
Right.
within the town called Ozumba, which is in the state of Mexico,
Right.
which is located just south of Mexico City at the base of the volcano Popocatépetl.
Gotcha.
Now, when Joseph Musser died and Rulon Allred assumed the leadership of the Allred group, that's what we used to call it back then. Very few of us referred to it as AUB back in the day.
Right.
Um, when he assumed the leadership there, he of necessity couldn't continue being the counselor down there for the people of Mexico, and Joe Thompson was appointed to do that.
Okay.
Now, um, Joe Thompson told me that he was always more what's the word, more affixed to Joseph Musser than he was Rulon Allred. He actually recognized Rulon Allred's authority and calling and everything, but he always felt that his mentor was Joseph Musser.
Okay. That tells me he's working a lot more with Musser early on
Yes,
than anything else. So he was more of a Musser acolyte than maybe an Allred acolyte.
he saw himself more as an Allred peer.
Okay. All right. No, that's good to know. See, that gives us some context right there. But do you feel like him and Rulon Allred did have a good relationship, or do you feel like it was strained at all, or
I would think that they had a good relationship as far as I know.
okay.
Uh, I do believe that, like any relationships, they had their strain here and there.
Sure.
But I do think that there was some strain in certain times, and he did allude to that, but it wasn't. And I will say that one of the things that was brought to my attention is that Rulon Allred made a prophecy that Joseph would lead his own group eventually, something to that effect, and they saw that as a negative.
Okay, I see. And I asked the question, but I also want to make it clear that just because the guys aren't getting along in every aspect doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily mean they're enemies, right? We can see this with Orson Hyde or Pratt. Hyde, Pratt. Which one gave Brigham such guff over there?
Orson Pratt.
Pratt, thank you. I get my Orsons mixed up. Orson Pratt and Brigham Young, they fight endlessly,
Right.
and yet still kind of have each other's backs, right?
Right.
And I think that it's important as we ask these questions to realize that you can work with guys that you don't necessarily always get along with or see eye to eye. So I think that gives us a real good feeling here of what this is. Joe Thompson is a guy who darn near becomes a Catholic. He ends up going straight from, not being involved in anything straight into fundamentalism, never a member of the LDS Church. Is down in Short Creek during some of the rough times, ends up moving up north, so to speak, is ordained by Musser himself, and seems to do a lot of work on the council with the AUB, pushing towards temple work and the perpetuation of the fullness of the gospel. So that gives us a good idea who he is. Now, this is where your specific reminiscence will memories, excuse me, will become much more important because you knew him personally.
Mm-hmm.
So what year do you join the AUB?
Officially, I joined the AUB in 1992.
Okay.
In the spring of 92. I started going to meetings in December of 91, and I went to meetings all throughout before my baptism. And I have to point out that I was attending priesthood meetings as well, and I was informed later on that it wasn't proper for me to be doing that.
Gotcha.
But
Gotcha. And how soon after you start attending with the AUB, not even necessarily join, but attending, do you meet Joe Thompson?
I didn't. I It's kind of funny because the first time I tried to meet him, I went up to shake his hand because I really liked a discourse that he gave. But I'll be honest with you, I felt kind of snubbed.
Really?
Yes, because I went to shake his hand and he looked at me kind of with suspicion. And so I remember feeling, that I was somewhat snubbed because, and, to be fair, I think they had a lot of guys that would flatter people.
Right.
And would say things like that. And I think they would get, and then later on show other colors.
Right.
So I think they were kind of jaded. But that's just my opinion.
Sure.
I can just offer you my opinion of that. But I remember getting my feelings a little hurt because I really enjoyed what you said. My name is Sean Anderson. And he was like, yeah, okay. And he walked away.
Oh,
That was my first encounter, personally with Joe Thompson. And that would have been, somewhere in 1992.
Gotcha. So when do you start striking up like a meaningful relationship with him? Because you've talked
Right.
with me about that quite a bit. At what point do you develop that personal relationship with Joe?
It wasn't until I didn't develop that relationship with him until early on in 1994.
Okay.
Which would have been somewhere between January and April of 94. I can't pinpoint the exact time.
Right. How's that get struck?
It got struck because in late 1993, and if I recall, it was in December, but don't hold me to it.
Sure.
I made a trip. I made a trip with a man by the name of Rob Hender, who wanted me to go down as an interpreter for him because he had an interest with a young lady down there. They've been writing letters or whatever, and he asked me to go down as an interpreter.
Going down for some senoritas and margaritas.
Senoritas. And they would probably say the lack of margaritas.
Right.
But anyway, so I agreed to go down with them. And of course, he paid for my way and stuff like that. And so that helped.
Right.
But anyway, because I was pretty broke at the time.
And it didn't suck. It was probably January in Salt Lake,
Right.
and you were going south where it's warm. Yeah, I get it.
The only part that sucked is the fact that I wouldn't be making any money.
Right. Check.
And I was not in a good position economically at the time. But I went down with him, and to my surprise, when we showed up at the airport, Brother Owen Allred and Marvin Allred were there. And it was to my surprise, we sat in seats right next to them, and we were on the same flight itinerary all the way down. We had a
Gotcha.
layover in Dallas, Fort Worth, and then from there we took a flight all the way to Mexico City.
Okay.
And on the way down, I don't remember having too much of a conversation with the brethren. I just
Oh, you're probably at that point, because I'm guessing you're what, mid-20s probably?
yes, 1990. This is 1993. I would have been 26.
Okay. I would have been like 15, 16. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay.
Since we're buds, and I enjoy calling you, old from time. Anyway, so you go down there, and you're a young man, right? And all of a sudden you're stuck in the middle of what you perceive to be like spiritual giants, right? The
Right.
the proper MO is to shut the hell up and just see if you can't learn something by
Right.
just being quiet.
And that's how I was. I was just being quiet, and they weren't on the way down. They weren't too talkative.
Right.
I remember kind of an interesting little thing when we got to Dallas Fort Worth and we had a couple hour layover there. Brother Owen Allred laid down on the floor because he wanted to nap. And I remember people coming around and asking, "Is he okay?" Because he's an elderly gentleman, and I had to say several times, "He's fine. He's just napping."
Okay, side story. So I worked for a company
Uh-huh.
for years in Boise, and it was owned by two old people that had like lived through World War II, named Carlisle and Maxine. And we had this massive pine tree out front of our office. And Lyle had paid for like some, the steel, really thin steel wire cable to be installed. And it's like a pulley system up top, so you could just kind of string lights up. And he ran power underneath the tree.
Mhm.
And one day he's down there in the winter and he's messing with the power. I had to step away to go get him a tool that he was messing with. And so Maxine, his wife, comes out and sees him under the tree. She doesn't see me, and she goes, "Lyle, are you dead?" And she was serious, right? And he goes, "No, I'm still here." And she goes, "Damn it," and then walked back in the house. So that just made me think of that when you said that. So what you're heading down to Mexico here with Joe, and
No, not with Joe.
not with Joe, with
Owen and Marvin.
Owen and
His brother,
Marvin,
yes.
and going down there to interpret. How does that tie into how you met Joe?
Well, it ties in that while we were down there, while we were down in Mexico, as you know, I went down to interpret for this Rob Hender
Right.
for his romantic interest that he had with a girl there, and they had an interpreter already assigned, and it happened to be Moroni Jessup's brother, a man by the name of Bernie Jessup.
Okay.
But Bernie Jessup was also getting married at that time,
Okay.
so he was, to say the least, quite distracted
Yes.
with arrangements.
Yes.
So I was approached by brother Marvin Allred, Owen's brother, and told me of the situation and said, "Would you be willing to translate for us,
Okay.
interpret for us?" I said, "Well, I'm here under this agreement with brother Rob Hender. Let me talk to him." So I went to Rob Hender and I asked him, and he said, "Oh yeah, go ahead, whatever those guys want. I consider it a privilege that I brought you down."
Right.
That's what he said to me. If it's going to serve their interests, even better.
Right.
I said, "Okay." So I went and told Marvin. He said that he'd be fine with that. So yeah, you can count on me. And so I went with them to pretty much every interview they had, every discussion they had in a private household. I interpreted their talks. I was there for temple session. I was there for sealings. I was there for patriarchal blessings. And in particular, they had a meeting in the solemn assembly of the temple.
Hmm.
And in that solemn assembly, Owen Allred got up and he says, and I remember him saying a while back, and you're all witnesses, I was here and I dedicated this edifice as a temple for the house of God. Well, I'm here to tell you now that I had no business doing that.
Mm.
So all the ordinances that have been performed here that require a temple are to be considered henceforth null and void.
Ooh.
And he says from now on we will refer to it as an endowment house.
Ooh.
Well, apparently I wasn't the only one that was shocked by the statement, because I looked around and the people looked like they had the rug just pulled out from under them.
Oh, yeah.
Some of them started sobbing.
Yeah. Because look, even if your living ordinances are so good, which was the purpose of an endowment house, right?
Right.
It's my understanding that an endowment house is perfectly fine for living ordinances, but to do vicarious work, you really should have a temple.
Well,
To a degree, right?
right. Well, yes, but under Owen's interpretation, you could do endowment work and baptisms for the dead in an
Okay.
endowment house, but you couldn't do what he called sealings.
Okay.
Sealings and also sealings of men to men,
Right.
which had been transpiring, by the way,
Right.
in that edifice. And when I heard that and I looked at the reaction of the people there, and as a side note, let me point out that when we did true order of prayer in that meeting, there's quite a few people in attendance. I would say on just off the top of my head, it seemed like 80 people.
Mm.
And you had some plural families or plural, I don't know, you call them couples,
Right.
but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Um,
A man and his wife.
Pull-upples.
Right. Yeah.
And so we had a big circle and then the circles within the circle.
Okay. Yep.
And I remember when all the signs were offered up in this order of prayer, I remember it looking very beautiful, because it was almost like synchronized swimming in a way,
Right.
where you see all this. And I can tell you, I've been in, I was endowed in the Mormon, in the
LDS.
mainstream LDS church, and I never saw anything like it.
Right.
It was beautiful to behold that sacred prayer being done that way. But just as a side note, but anyway, I remember thinking at the time, because I'm the one that had to interpret what he just said.
Yeah.
I remember being nervous about translating that because I knew the effect it would have on the people. But being true to the fact that I was there to interpret, I did, and I saw them. I saw them. I saw their reaction
Yeah, because
firsthand.
according to Owen Allred's definition, you could do baptism and endowments, but that was it.
Right.
Okay, so let me ask you this, Sean. If that's all that they could do in endowment, how
For the dead. Let's
for the dead,
Right.
but they could do sealings for the living. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, that I could see where that would jerk the rug out from under people, right? You've done all this work for your kindred dead. You've sealed them back together.
Mm-hmm.
And now for somebody to come along and say it's invalid. What was Owen Allred's reasoning behind that? Did he give any reasoning behind that?
Not really. The reasoning he gave was I had no business doing that. That's all he said.
Mm.
He didn't elaborate as to why or why not and any of that.
Right.
So I have my own opinions of what he might have been thinking or whatever, but I have to admit that's purely speculation on my part.
Yeah, and look, where he's not here to say whether that was right or wrong, we'll stay away from that speculation for now.
Okay.
Because I think that's the wise and probably the thing to do to be keeping in propriety. So he jerks the rug out from under folks that way, right? And look, I want to say this: I'm not calling Owen Allred a bad man at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you can disagree with somebody without saying that they're a bad person, right? There's nothing that indicates to me that Owen was especially nefarious. I think that from all accounts, he seems to be a good guy. So I want to get that out of the way first. So after that happens, you have to translate it. You see the aftermath of people's reactions. You go to that prayer meeting afterwards. What goes
Well, it's
on
at
that?
the prayer meeting that he announced it, by the way.
Oh, it was at the prayer meeting.
And then later on, he announced it to the general.
Oh, okay. All right. So after that all happens, what happens next?
Well, what happened? You know what? I forgot one detail. Let me
Yeah,
go back. Previous to that meeting,
okay.
the man who hosted us in his house, that's Rob Hender and myself.
Right.
His name was Fidencio Juarez. He was
Okay.
an elderly man. And one of the first things he asked me if I spoke Mexican. I says, "You mean Spanish?" He says, "No, I mean Mexican. Do you speak Mexican?" I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "The language of the Aztecs." I said, "No, I don't." And he says, "I do."
Hmm.
He says, I'm Mexica,
Okay.
which is Mexicatl, which is what the Aztecs called themselves.
Okay.
Now, a lot of people, when they say Aztecs, Aztec denotes where they came from, the land of Aztlan.
You're right.
But when they arrived in the Valley of Mexico, which back then was known as Mexicotl, they knew themselves as the Mexicatl,
Right.
or the Mexica.
Right.
This is where we get the word Mexican from.
So where was Aslan at?
Um, well, there's debate on that. My personal opinion, and it was up around the Utah area,
Okay.
because it was a land northward, and they speak of land, landmarks.
Okay.
Like for instance, in the Utah Valley, we have Mount Timpanogos,
Yes.
which is
The sleeping woman. Yep.
sleeping woman. Well, next to Popocatépetl down in Mexico, Popocatépetl is the volcano.
Yes.
Right next to it is a mountain they call Ixtlazoctli, which
Mm.
means the sleeping woman.
Okay.
And it has the same outline of a sleeping woman.
I get it. So it looks an awful lot like Timpanogos.
Right. And there
Interesting.
are some old Spanish maps, dating from the 1700s that denote the Utah area around the Salt Lake region as Aslan.
Interesting.
But anyway, that's a side topic. But um, now I lost my train of thought. Where were
Sorry.
we?
Well, I was saying after that prayer meeting, you were talking about that gentleman
Yes,
who was
Fidencio Juarez.
yes.
Before the meeting, before it was announced, I forgot to mention also that at that meeting he announced that they dropped Joseph Thompson from the council, and that he would no longer be coming representing the council to those people.
Oh, so that was part of the announcement. So
Yeah.
one announcement is it's no longer a temple. Anything done here that required a temple, null and void. Consider it not done. You'll have to wait till a temple is available to redo that.
Mm-hmm.
Second announcement is Joe Thompson's off the council.
Right.
Okay, and this would have been 93, you said?
93, yeah.
Okay. So, but you're not real familiar with Joe at this point, but I'm
No,
guessing
I hadn't yet had a personal conversation with him.
right. So you're talking to this old um Aztec gentleman.
Yes.
What does he say?
Well, the things he said is he was very proud of the fact that he was an adopted son of Bill Baird.
Okay.
Bill Baird was a member of the council as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Bill Baird had died in December of 92.
Okay.
So, and he was very saddened by that. As a matter of fact, he was very emotional and saying how much he lamented the loss of Bill Baird,
Right.
his adopted father,
Right.
which was interesting because he was older than his adopted father.
Right.
Fidencio Juarez, I believe, was either in his late 70s or in his 80s.
Okay.
But anyway, he says to me at one point, he says, brother, they called me Cesar. My middle name is Cesar.
Caesar. Yeah.
Caesar. And I don't really like telling people down there my name is Sean because when I went to school,
Sounds awfully Irish.
no, have nothing to do with that. When I say Sean in Mexico, they can't pronounce Sean. They say Chan, which is part of Chango, which means monkey. And so they used to make fun of my name and call me Chango. Yeah.
If you want to know what it's like being my friend, I'm going to use that on him later. Go ahead.
Okay. But anyway, so I gave him my middle name.
Right.
Anyway, and he said, Hermano Cesar, which means Brother Cesar, can I have a word with you in private?
Mm.
And I thought I was in trouble.
Right. Right. You
Because,
broke some etiquette somewhere.
yes, I broke some etiquette somewhere. I was a guest in his house. And his house was built where he had a little courtyard in the middle and rooms around it.
Right.
And I was in one of these rooms.
Yeah.
And his room was across the little courtyard. So he asked me to go talk to him in his bedroom.
Oh,
So
jeez.
I went over there. And he has me sit down at the edge of the bed, and he remained standing. Because, he had a big bed that took up most of the room. And I sat in the corner front edge of the bed, and he remained standing. And he says, the Spirit tells me I can trust you.
Ooh.
He says, so I don't want you to repeat anything that is said here with your companion that you came with. Can you agree to that? And I said, yes, I can agree to that. I wouldn't dare to, break any confidence you have for me. And he says, well, I want to start by asking you a question. And I says, what's that? What's happening with brother Joe? Referring to Joe Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what do you mean? And he said, they tell us he's sick, and that's why you haven't been seeing him or heard from him. But something tells me there's more going on.
Did you know more about it than that at that time?
Me? Yes, I did. Because in August of that same year is when they announced that Joe was dropped from the council.
Okay.
So I did know that. I didn't know a lot of details regarding it. I knew, I heard rumors of the accusations that were brought against him and things like that. But officially I knew that he had been dropped from the council because Owen announced it in August of '93. Right. And I said to him, Joe Thompson's been dropped from the council. And he said, why? I says, I don't know much about it, but the allegations are that he was accused of sexual child molestation.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I said that, he says, that's not true. And I said, really? How do you know? And he said, and this is what he said to me. He said, a couple weeks ago, I had a visitor in this very room. What do you mean? A visitor that was very resplendent and brilliant.
Mm.
Do you mean very smart? He goes, no, I mean luminous.
Oh boy.
I said, really? He said, yes. And he said, and he showed me in vision that we as a people would be going back to Jackson County, Missouri, and that Joe Thompson would be leading the way.
Interesting.
And then he said, but before that day could come, he would be betrayed by his brethren.
Ooh. Okay.
I said, really? He said, yes. And then he says to me, can I trust you that you can keep this between us? And I said, you bet. And it was after that that Brother Owen made the statement about demoting the temple to an endowment house.
Wow. So you got kind of blindsided a little bit with two shots, right?
Right.
One is, at this point, it doesn't sound like you harbor necessarily any ill will towards Joe Thompson.
You mean Owen?
No, Joe Thompson, because you had the one meeting with him, right, where you just kind of shook his hand. So you don't have any ill will. You have no ill will towards Owen, but yet you're reeling now a little bit, right? Yes. Because you have this. It sounds like this gentleman who was Aztec was carrying a certain spirit about him, right? And it's obviously making, the spirit's obviously bearing some testimony here to you that you feel like, okay, this guy's legit. He's not just, talking junk, right?
Right.
He's got some validity here to him. The spirit's carrying the truthfulness of that message. Then you immediately go, it sounds like, to the prayer meeting where Owen Allred says, okay, no longer a temple and an endowment house, and Joe Thompson's no longer on the council either. Right. And so, like, dude, how are you taking that? Your head's got to be spinning here
It
a little
is.
bit, right? I
It is
mean,
spinning.
it sounds like you took a left hook and then an uppercut you never saw coming, trying to get your legs under you. How are you processing all this in this time?
Well, I have to say, to kind of prelude my answer to that, is before the controversy with Joe Thompson, before that took place. I have to admit it was his talks that were my favorite.
Right.
Because the first meeting I attended there, Joe Thompson was speaking on the Adam God doctrine
Hmm.
in a very, I don't even know how to describe it. But all I could describe it as is, here is one speaking as one having authority and not as the scribes.
Okay.
Because I have heard intellectuals speak about it,
Right.
pro and con. But he did it in an authoritative manner. And I'm not talking about authority of, I'm in this position, therefore, but more authority that he knows the truth of it.
Yeah, the words are carrying the authority, not
Right.
the supposed authority you get from a position or a
Right.
title. The spirit's bearing witness of what he's talking about and that sort
Which
of thing.
is, by the way, that was the time when I went up to shake his hand,
Right, right.
where I felt somewhat snubbed.
So at any point here, either during this prayer meeting or maybe subsequently after that prayer meeting or on the flight home, do you get to talk to Owen or any of the other council
Hmm.
that go about what's going on at all? Or are you just kind of in the mode of, I've been hit here a little bit and I'm just going to be quiet and see if I can't make heads or tails of this?
Before that, let me give you more context. Before I went on this trip, or before the accusations were made public, as a matter of fact, just about 2 weeks before the accusations even came out, Joe Thompson, he was suffering from renal failure. His kidneys were going bad on him.
Right.
So he was in the hospital. And by this time, I had befriended two of his sons. I befriended Leland Thompson and Paul Thompson.
Okay.
And for some reason, I was giving Paul Thompson a ride home. And on the way home, he says, "Do you mind if we stop in to visit my dad before we go home? Before you take me home?" Sure. What's going on? He says, "Well, he's at the hospital. I want to go visit him." Okay, that's fine with me.
And this is before and
Before the accusations, yes. So we went there, but I didn't do much talking. It was Paul, how you doing, Dad, and everything. But while we were there, Brother Owen showed up, Brother Dave Watson showed up, Brother Lemoyne Jensen showed up, Moroni Jessup and his wife Martha or Andrea was there. And they were there visiting him, and these other brethren showed up. And I do believe some of the wives were there. I remember seeing some of the wives, some of Brother Joe's wives were there. I can't remember them all by name at the time. But they were there, and they gave him a blessing that he could heal or whatever. And there was a very strong spirit in there.
right.
And there seemed to be a brotherhood I saw with these brethren that was pretty, I saw intense caring.
Right.
And just a couple weeks later, it seemed to all fall apart. And then
Right.
a couple weeks after that, or a month or so, is when they made the announcement that he'd been dropped from the council. And the official charge was, which I always considered was a little weird because they didn't specify. They just said unchristian-like conduct and unrighteous dominion.
Yeah, and we're going to get to those charges later.
But anyway, so all this happened before I went to Mexico. So in some ways, you could say I was kind of primed
Right.
already with what's going on here.
Right.
Not so much knowing what's going on or anything like that, is just enough was happening that I was beginning to think, what is going on here? Something wasn't making sense to me.
It's unsettling, right? I
Right.
mean, yeah, no, it's unsettling when you go from the spirit of that hospital room being that of intense brotherhood and love to
almost complete antagonism.
Right. That's a quick turnaround,
Right.
right?
And so by the time I'm in Mexico and then Brother Owen makes the announcement about the temple, I got some serious concerns now,
Right.
especially after the conversation I had with Fidencio Juarez.
Right.
So during that time, I didn't say anything to anybody about the feelings I was beginning to generate at the time. I wasn't saying anything to anybody, but I made it uh, a matter of importance that I have to go talk with Joe Thompson when I got back.
Okay.
And one of the reasons is while I was down there and I was translating for Owen and Marvin, we had a meeting with the president of the colony, a man by the name of Rosendo de la Cruz. And in that meeting, Rosendo de la Cruz um, reported to Owen and Marvin that Joseph Thompson had offered him a second anointing,
Mm,
which alarmed both of those men,
right.
especially Owen. I remember Owen saying, "Can you believe Joe was doing that down here?"
Mm,
But anyway, um, when I got back after my trip, I never did, speak about some of these concerns with anybody I was traveling with
well, yeah.
because I kind of knew what their views were going to be,
Right.
and I know that if I raised some of this, it would, call me into question.
Right.
But when I got back, I remember talking to Moroni Jessup about it. As a matter of fact, it was him, his wife, my first wife, and myself who were there talking. And during that time, I really feel like we need to go talk with Brother Joe. And Moroni Jessup says, I think we ought to go tonight. It was already, mind you, about 8 o'clock,
Okay.
8 p.m. And I was living in American Fork. And so before going, though, I suggested, let me call Paul Thompson, and see if that would be a good idea. So I called him and told him that I wanted, he says, yeah, my dad's over at blessing somebody's house. They just were moving into a house and he was blessing their house.
Mm.
And he says, but I'm sure my dad would be interested in talking to you.
So he's off the council, but people are still calling him to come in and bless their home.
Well, his children.
His children. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I feel like before we go on to that conversation that you will end up having with Joe, you, Moroni,
Mm-hmm.
and your wives.
No, my wives weren't there when I went.
Okay, I thought you said your first wife was there.
Well, we were having a conversation about going to see him.
Okay, so did anybody's wives accompany you guys over? Okay, so it was just the fellas.
It's just
Okay.
just Moroni and I.
Okay. So before you go have that talk, I think now's probably a good time because I can imagine that you're going to be on a truth finding mission, right? We're going to get down to the bottom of
Yes.
what this is. I imagine at this point you want to let's go ahead and let's go over what the charges were for Joe Thompson, right? What he was
Okay.
charged with. And let's get into the specifics about that and whatnot. But let's do that in a second because I got to take a short break. Okay, so before we go to the charges, you said that there was one other piece of information about a prayer you offered concerning this
Okay.
that was important.
Now I have to backtrack back to August of '93, which is before I made the trip to Mexico.
Right.
Because I didn't go to the trip to Mexico. If I recall, it was either late November, early December.
Okay.
All I do know, and this is probably something we could fact check, is they were celebrating uh, Owen Allred's birthday.
Yeah.
They even made a cake.
And it was his birthday month.
Yes.
Okay. I can fact check that real fast.
But anyway, the same day that Brother Owen made the announcement in August of '93, where they informed everybody that they had dropped Joe Thompson from the council on the charges of what they called unrighteous dominion and unchristian-like conduct. After the meeting, I was invited by a man by the name of Lewis Herring. He invited myself and my wife to go have dinner with them, and they lived in Harriman. And when we arrived there, he apparently invited another couple, a man by the name of Johann Boss and his wife. So we had dinner and we talked, and he wanted us to each share our conversion stories, how we came into the group. Both of us came from the mainstream LDS church. I had fundamentalist backgrounds. Johann didn't. And we both shared our conversion stories. Well, afterwards, Lewis Herring made the statement, I want to talk about the elephant in the room. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, Owen's announcement today regarding Joe Thompson. What do you guys feel about that? And I told him, well, I don't really know Joe, so I don't really
Have an opinion.
one way or the other. And he says, well, I can tell you that there's a split coming over this, and you better know what side you're going to be on.
Oh.
And I says, what do you mean? And he says, you either are going to support Brother Owen and what he did, or you're going to stand against him. I said, so are you saying whether I'm willing to proclaim that Joe Thompson is guilty of these things or not? He goes, well, yeah. I says, well, if that's the case, and I have to make a decision on that, do you have any evidence that I can look at? Says there's enough evidence to put the man behind bars for 15 years. And I said, are you prepared to show me that evidence? And he says, no. He says, I'm privy to it. He says, but no. And I says, then I don't really appreciate the pressure you're putting on me.
Right, because he's kind of asking for blind obedience.
Right. And he said, and he says to me, what do you mean? I said, you're asking me to render judgment on something I have no knowledge of.
Right.
I says, this has nothing to do with me sustaining Brother Owen and his calling or anything like that. Is, I was perfectly fine to let this controversy be between Owen, Joe, and the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're telling me that I have to be on board with the decision over his guilt or innocence, I says, I can't do that in a righteous manner without examining the proof that there is or lack thereof.
Yeah.
And he again said, well, you're going to have to, make a choice. And I says, you're telling me I have to make a choice, but I don't have access to the evidence. And he says, well, you'll probably have to pray about it. That's where you get your evidence. Well, I had already read from Joseph Smith saying that no man can be condemned based on spiritual evidence alone.
Right.
I didn't say that to him, and that's what went through my mind.
Right.
And I said, well, that may be, but I hesitate to raise my voice in condemnation of any man without any evidence.
Right.
And when I said what I said, the Johann Boss kind of stated the same thing. And so Lewis Herring kind of backed off.
So you think that Herring was inviting you over to see where you guys sat?
I don't know.
Okay.
It could be, maybe not. I
Just
don't know.
kind of way of gauging, right?
Right. Who knows? That's all I can answer to that.
Right.
I'm not going to sit here and try to speculate as to a guy's motivation. But anyway, I was kind of perturbed by that night, by what he said. So when I got home, before I got home, I told my wife, I said, I'm really bothered by what was said tonight.
Right.
And it's gotten me questioning what happened.
What'd your wife say to that?
She says, yeah, it kind of bothered me too.
Okay.
I said, would you be willing to go into the true order of prayer with me? And asking about this. She goes, yeah. So when we got home and put the kids to sleep, We made a little makeshift altar. We got
Mhm.
in. We got into our robes and offered up the true order of prayer. And the question was, is Brother Joseph Thompson guilty of the charges that have been brought against him? Now, granted, at the time, I didn't know what they were yet,
Right.
precisely. I was just asking generally, is he guilty of the charges brought against him? After the prayer, I remember thinking that he was innocent. I had a very strong impression of that, but I didn't get any, and I'll be honest, I didn't, get any
Right.
outright.
You didn't get the particulars, right? It
No.
was just a blanket no.
Well, I would say it was more of a feeling.
Right.
I didn't hear enough
Right,
or
right,
anything.
right. Right. Your answer is a blanket no, though, right?
Right.
That's the feeling you got.
But after the prayer, we sat and meditated for a while, and I saw that my wife had uh, an expression that showed that she received something.
Hmm.
And I asked her, "Did you get some?" She goes, "Yes." "What did you get?" And she didn't say, "I got this" or "I got that." She just started saying, "My servant Joseph Thompson is innocent before my eyes.
Hmm.
My judgments fall on his accusers."
Hmm.
Now, if you
Interesting.
knew my wife, she didn't talk that way.
Right.
She wasn't what I would call very gifted in that manner of speech.
Right.
Not to mention when she said it, it burned in my bosom.
Okay.
And I remember it making a big impression on me.
Okay.
Now, that same week, this was a Sunday night. The same week on a Wednesday night, they had general priesthood meetings. I don't remember precisely whether they started at 6 or 7 p.m., but they were held at the RCA building there in Bluffton. I used to actually take time off work because I worked the night shift to go to those meetings. And they were generally like 2-hour meetings. I went to one of those meetings, and that meeting was all about the evils of Joe Thompson. I can't remember
Hmm.
who it was that was giving the class, but it seemed to me that it was Harry Bonnell, but I'm not positive. So, don't hold me to that. And I remember brethren saying, "Yeah, I always knew there was something off with that guy." And, that you were hearing those type of murmurings, and I
Right.
was hearing them all around me. And I remember thinking, this is so insensitive because I'm sure there's a lot of children of Joe Thompson in this meeting, a lot of his sons.
Right.
It just seems like what the conduct of the meeting was very insensitive and improper. I remember
Right.
thinking that. After the meeting, I saw a small group of Joe Thompson's sons. I would say about 6 of them that were kind of gathered in a little circle, almost looked like a huddle. And they're talking to each other. And every now and then I'd see one of them look around as though they're being, seeing if anybody's around them hearing what they're saying. And I felt inspired to go tell them of the experience that I had with my wife after that prayer. I said, I'm not going to do that because I still had my doubts as to whether that was a legitimate thing.
Right. Right. You were doubting your own feelings,
Right. I was
which is
doubting,
healthy.
right. I was doubting my own feelings and even doubting what my wife said.
Right.
And I got the strong impression, go share that with them. I said, no, second time. A third time, go share it with them. And I was like, if these accusations happen to be true, I'm going to really tick them off.
Yeah.
But I went and did it anyway. And in that group were the two I told you about that I had already befriended. There was Paul Thompson and Leland Thompson. And gathered in that little group was Kent Thompson, Hiram Thompson, Alan Thompson, and I believe, I can't remember who the other one was.
Okay.
I says, brethren, I don't know if what I'm going to say is upsetting or not to you guys. But I feel very impressed to share something that happened with me and my wife Sunday night. And they said, "Oh, what was that?" We asked if your dad was guilty or innocent of the charges brought against him. And the answer that my wife uttered was, "My servant Joseph Thompson is innocent. Before my eyes, my judgments fall on his accusers." I remember Paul Thompson hugged me and said, "Thank you. We needed to hear that." Well, it became obvious to me that his sons that were there didn't believe what was happening.
Right.
And that's a good indicator, because generally speaking, men who have this propensity don't just victimize one or two here and there. They have a pattern.
Right.
And it seems like these, at least these sons of his, didn't believe that was true.
Gotcha.
So this has to precede, everything I've been saying about these later meetings.
Right.
It's already kind of shaping my thinking.
Right. So by the time you get to Mexico, you've had these experiences.
Yes.
And then what the gentleman, the Aztec gentleman tells you, he is just a further witness of what you've already been getting.
And then Owen's own undedicating of the temple.
Right.
Just now some could argue that it's all confirmation bias.
Right.
And I could understand why. But for me, it was very real.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the actual charges, and then I want to go into that meeting that you and Moroni have with
Okay.
Joe Thompson. So what exactly are the charges?
Now, the charges, the best I can say, speak to them, I know of at least three allegations that were made by three of his children, two of his daughters, one of his son.
Okay.
Now, I've heard that there's more than that, but those are the only ones that I can concretely say were part of it. And I'm not going to name names. I just want to say that there's two daughters and a son.
Okay.
Because I think that these kind of things bring up complications that affect people, that collateral damage that I don't want to
Sure.
Cause problems for. But the allegations were made is that when they were very young, that their father abused them. Now,
Sexually, right?
Sexually. Every one of these people that I'm talking to were adults and older than me.
Right.
And they were older than me, I would say by close to 10 years.
Okay. How many kids did Joe have?
I was told he had 60.
Okay.
Now, one thing I want to point out is all three of these came from the same mother.
Okay.
Whether that makes any difference or not, I don't know.
Does this mother stay with Job?
No.
Okay. Does she leave during the time of the allegations or before?
I don't know, but I tend to think that it was around the allegations.
Okay. All right.
I'm not positive, though. I don't know.
So these are adult children by now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So they level these charges of sexual abuse of a child on Joe. And the council seems to take their word for it right away.
I don't know if it's right away.
Okay.
I will say that and by the council, I don't think that you have unanimity in that.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I know you don't. But the consensus is reached that for some reason or other, they got to drop Joe.
Okay. I want to talk about how the charges come to be, right? Why are they made during these three kids' adulthood and not their childhood?
Because what was purported is that it was memories that they recovered.
Explain recovered.
Have you heard of the concept of repressed memories?
Yes.
Well, that's what it has to do with. Repressed memories that were later recovered.
What was the mechanism for recovery? Were they through dreams? Were they through, look, I just had had a young lady on who talked about memories that were repressed that came to the forefront, right? And she said they were triggered by, of all things, going to a graduation. Why, I don't know, but that's what happened. Is it that sort of a deal, or is it something else? Are these things that they're recovering, or are there other methods by which these memories are being extracted?
I will answer that by telling you what one of the council members said to me,
Okay.
and that happened to be Marvin Allred,
Owen's brother.
Owen's brother. Yes, I'll get into the circumstances that led to me meeting with him later.
Okay.
But when I presented, I actually have to give you the backdrop. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, do it. Do it. You're fine.
And this few years down the line,
Okay.
this what these meetings that I'm telling you about happened 93, 94. Now we fast forward to 1997, and I asked the Elders Quorum president for permission to court his daughter. He told me that he'll pray about it. A week later, being an Elders Quorum president, and I'm in an Elders Quorum meeting, he says he wants to talk to me during his announcements, which he usually gave before the meeting started. He said, I want to talk with Sean Anderson after meeting in the library, before we start, after meeting. Well, when I went to that, and I had to give you more context, I had blown out my my right knee, and so I was on crutches
Right.
during the time. So at the time, I couldn't drive myself to work because I had this stiff brace that I couldn't bend my leg with,
Right.
and so I couldn't drive. So Alan Grover is the man who gave me a ride to that elders meeting, and they were held at 7 a.m. on Sunday mornings.
Okay.
So I attended the meeting, and after the meeting, I went into the library, and they followed in after me. I was just in the library waiting for them. And the Elders Quorum president and his two counselors came in. And they had a lot of little kindergarten type seats. And I was asked to take a seat in one of them. So you can picture that.
Yeah.
And then he pulled up another seat, put his foot on it, bending his knee,
Sure.
putting his elbow on his knee and his fist under his chin, and looked at me and says, well, I'm gonna just cut to the chase, Sean. Brother Owen has asked us to invite you not to attend any more priesthood meetings or functions.
Whoa.
Now, this is 1997.
Okay, so up to that point, had you been vocal about defending Joe?
Not much, no.
Okay.
Just within the circles that I knew felt
We're
safe.
safe.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so I said, why? You'll have to take that up with Brother Owen. And I says, well, I'm sure you have some idea. I mean, the week before I had just asked him for the permission to court his daughter.
Right.
And I don't think it's a coincidence that I come in and I'm told that I'm out.
Right.
And he says, well, we feel that your loyalties lie with Joseph Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
And I says, and how do you ascertain that? Well, don't you? I says, I'll be honest with you, I don't believe he's guilty, if that's what you're asking. But have you ever heard me say anything disruptive in class? Or can you point to anybody here I tried to convert to that idea?
Right.
He says, well, no. Then on what basis are you removing me, other than Brother Owen just saying to get rid of me? And I says, besides that, don't you think what you said was an oxymoron?
I invite you not to.
And he said, what do you mean? I says, invite me not to attend? That's a classic definition of an oxymoron.
Right.
All they could say was, you have to take that up with Brother Owen. But the Elders Quorum president says to me, look, if I think something and Brother Owen thinks otherwise, I think he's the man with the keys. He must know better.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I'm not like you,
Yeah.
especially when I see things that don't seem to be going in the same direction,
Making sense.
making sense to me. I reserve the right to have my own judgment.
Right.
That's what I said. I don't think they thought that I would actually go and talk to Owen.
Right.
I went home. I went home after that encounter. I didn't go to the sacrament meeting following because I was told not to. And and so I called Brother Marvin Allred, who lived down in Rocky Ridge, just south of Santaquin, Utah.
Mm-hmm.
I called him because I had established a good rapport with him when I on my trip in Mexico with him,
Right.
a few years before. And I asked him if I could have, come talk to him. He says, sure, what about? I says, I'd rather tell you when I get there, but it's important. I really think I really need to talk with you. I said, okay. And he says, and I can't remember, but he said 3 o'clock. Does 3 o'clock work for you?
Sure.
And it was 3 or 4 o'clock, but it was kind of mid to late afternoon.
Right.
So I drove down, and it was in the fall. I remember it being getting kind of nippy outside.
Right.
So I drove down, and but before that, I wrote down what happened between the elders quorum presidency and myself.
Right.
And when I got there, I knocked on the door, and one of his wives came to the door and said, how can I help you? I says, I have a meeting with Brother Marvin. She goes, oh, let me go see. And then she comes back, she says, he's expecting you in his office. So I walked in, and he was there in the office waiting for me. And Brother Marvin, I have to say that I really liked this about him. He was a very affectionate, loving man.
Right.
And as I walked in, he stood up and he shook my hand with both hands. And he says, how can I help you, dear?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, may I take a seat? And he goes, yeah. So I sat down, he sat down at his desk, and I says, if you would read this, then we can proceed to talk. So I handed him the little synopsis that I wrote of what took place. He read it and he started shaking his head, and then he put his hand over his brow and started saying, shaking his head and saying, we're losing our strength, we're losing our strength. And I said, what do you mean, Brother Marvin? He said, Brother Joe's sons are some of the strongest boys we have in this group, and I don't mean strong as in physical, but strong in
Sure.
the faith. And he has one of the best retention rates of his children in the fullness of the gospel. And he says, and many of his children have entered plural marriage. And because of what happened with the controversy over their father, we're losing a few of them. And now we're kicking you out. And he says, and I've always thought that you were strong.
Hmm.
And I don't understand it.
Hmm.
And then he said, I worked intimately close with Joe Thompson for 40 years, and never once have I known him to be an immoral man.
So even Owen Allred's brother Marvin is expressing some hesitancy here.
Yes. And so when he said that, I said, are you telling me you don't believe Brother Joe's guilty of these charges? He says, absolutely not. That was, honestly, that was a surprise to me.
Yeah, because it's Owen Allred's brother,
It's
right?
his
Like,
brother, and he was there with the council when they made their announcement, and he stood behind Brother Owen supporting him and the decision they made on Brother Joe.
and Marvin was probably there when Ruin was running the show, so to speak, right? I mean,
Well, Marvin was there from the day Joseph Musser said, come on.
oh, okay,
Now, at that point, I said, so you don't believe the charges brought against him in reference to child molestation? He goes, absolutely not. What are your reasons? Why don't you believe him? And then he said, well, uh, I believe those girls were disturbed. What do you mean by that? Their testimony, he says their testimonies were brought out through hypnosis.
Oh, okay. All right. So the whole, you know, hypnotherapy, regressive. Okay.
So he said that. He says their testimonies were brought out through hypnosis. And he says, I don't know about you, Sean, but I don't think that that is a reliable way of determining witnesses.
No, there's so much that can go on with that, right? And look, I've never done it myself, but I know some people who later have said that they had memories of things that weren't legit, right?
Right.
And look, I want to say this, repressed memory, I do think is a thing, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think personally, I've seen people who endure trauma who, as a coping mechanism, shove that down. So repressed memories, I got no problems with. However, when you start getting into regressive hypnotherapy, you start getting into some really dicey things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And look, Joe Thompson's not the only guy that this happened to. Hugh Nibley's daughter accused him of molesting her while under hypnoregressive therapy. And so it is a science, I can't even call it science, it's a pseudoscience that I don't think has I don't quote me on this, I'd have to fact check it, but I can't think of one case where repressed, where hypnotic regression was used to any efficacy
Mm-hmm.
in a court of law because it is so suspect in how it happened. So each one of these each one of the three level the charge because these memories were retrieved from hypnotherapy.
That's what he said.
Wow. And Sean, just for clarification, that was 1997, and then you don't end up leaving the All Red group till 1999, so about 2 years later. Okay.
Now I'm not going to add to or take from that. That was the conversation I had with him,
Right.
to the best of my memory.
Right.
Now, now we have to. That kind of gives you the nature of the allegations made against him.
Right.
So now let's fast forward.
Go back.
Go back in time, back to the end
93.
of 93, early 94. I can't remember.
When you're about to go talk to Joe.
Right. Now, when did you say Owen's birthday was?
It was January 15th.
Okay, so they were pre-celebrating his birthday.
Right, which would make sense. If it was late November, early December, yeah, you're going to do that. It's close, right?
And they're celebrating his 80th birthday, and if I recall, he was born 1914.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
But anyway, I made the determination to go talk to Joe Thompson.
You and Morona.
Yes, because I talked to Moroni about what happened in Mexico.
Right.
And so we decided, and Moroni was always one that was quick to say, the Spirit tells me we should do it.
Right.
And I learned to trust Moroni on that because he usually is pretty good that way.
Right.
And so we went. Before we went, like I said before, I talked to Paul Thompson. He said his father is out doing a house blessing. And so I'll talk to him afterwards. Then I get a call from Paul. It's already 10 o'clock, and he got a call. He says he wants to meet with you.
Okay.
It's 10 p.m., mind you.
Right.
I thought he was going to set an appointment for later.
Right.
So I said, so when do you want us to come over? He goes, well, now would be a good time. Okay, so he's come over to my place, and I'll show you how to get to his. See, at the time, I didn't even know where Joe lived. I knew he was, he had a house somewhere in Harriman. He had one in Lehigh, and he also had one in Harriman. And so Moroni and I get out and leave, and it's late, and our wives stay behind. They stay. And needless to say, I was going to say Moroni and his wife Martha spent the night at our place.
Right.
But anyway, we drove we drove off and went to Harriman over to Paul's place. And Paul says, okay, let me call him. He says he's ready for us. So we then go up to, apparently he didn't live too far. It was just up the road a little bit. Okay. Knock on the door, and Sister Shirley Thompson opens the door, and he said, oh, hi, you guys. How are you? And she's always a very, I would say, very jovial person.
Okay.
She was heavy set, but she had a very jolly expression. She was quite a sweetheart.
Gotcha.
That was Shirley Thompson. And he says, oh, Joe's looking forward to talking with you. So I felt, oh, I guess it's not an imposition.
Right.
So she takes us back to his bedroom. And if I recall, my memory might be failing me here, but it almost seemed like he had a hospital bed in his room. And we showed up, and she had set 2 folding chairs on the wall just opposite from the foot of his bed. And that's where Moroni and I were invited to sit. I remember Brother Joe, he'd been having a lot of health issues, but he sat up, and he was in his undies, and he scooted up and sat at the edge of the bed and started talking to us. And if I recall, he says, what do you guys need to know? I says, well, first of all, are you guilty of the allegations that were made against you? And he said, categorically not guilty.
Okay.
There's no hesitation there. I rather really like that answer. Categorically not guilty. And he says, but somehow I think that we should be talking about something else. And then he began to elaborate on the fullness of the priesthood. And he talked about his experience of how Joseph Musser did that for them.
Interesting.
And the circumstances surrounding it, and talking to us about how vitally important this ordinance was to the restoration and to the world.
Right.
I can tell you this, being there, that he lit up. We didn't leave his house till 3 a.m.
Wow.
And I can tell you that aside from the Lord himself and, through visions or dreams or anything, I had never been so edified by a man in my life.
Did Moroni feel the same way?
Yes. And we both there made the determination that we would defend Joe Thompson's character.
Knowing full well what that meant, right?
Right.
That was going to put you at odds.
Now, yes, I wasn't proactive about it, but if asked the questions, I would say it.
Right.
That was I think Moroni was a little bolder than I was in that.
Right.
Because Moroni went and talked to his dad and to his father-in-law. That would be Ted Jessup and Mel Sullivan. And both of us cautioned us about taking a stand against the Lord's anointed.
Wow.
But both of those men, on their own, Brother Ted decided he wanted to go talk to Joe too, because Joe had been very helpful in his journey.
Right.
And Brother Mel had remembered a note that he took called the Oath of Brotherhood that they did. Well, I don't know if it was administered by Brother Rulin or Brother Owen, according to his account. That detail slips me, but they were put under that oath that I will not believe any derogatory report of any of you brethren unless I talk with you and receive that perfect witness or something to that effect.
Right.
For I believe you to be men of God. And this,
Yeah.
And he said that he hadn't honored that, so he wanted to go talk to Brother Joe.
As he should, right?
As
he took
should.
a covenant, and he's gonna exercise it.
Well, he did that and came out of it. Brother Joe's innocent.
Wow.
Brother Ted, in talking to Joe for a different reason, came out of it with Joe's innocent. Now, a lot of people assumed that I and Moroni were following Ted and Mel.
Which isn't the case. They were kind of coming up with their own conclusions after you guys
after us. We were actually
took the initiative.
Now, Brother Joe Thompson's daughter told me that I was, in fact, the first person outside the Thompson family that made a stand for him.
Hmm.
I always thought it was another man by the name of Ken Jepson, but she said, no, you preceded him by a little bit. I won't mention names of who these daughters and sons are because,
Right.
you know, things get
We want to
complicated.
protect their privacy.
Right. But anyway, if they listen to this podcast, I'm sure they'll know who they are.
Check.
But anyway, so going back in time, as I said, at this priesthood meeting, I made I shared the experience with some of the Thompson sons of what happened. And not much happened for a little while. But getting close to April, I get a call from his daughter, Brother Thompson's, Joe Thompson's daughter. And she's influential, by the way. That's all I'm going to say. And she said, you've been invited to attend a solemn assembly down in Mesa. My dad explicitly wanted you to go there.
Joe Thompson was
Yes.
calling this solemn assembly.
Yes.
In Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Now,
are you comfortable saying whereabouts in Arizona?
Mesa.
Okay.
And
you may have said that. I missed it probably.
It was actually posted by Ted Jessup because they had, you know, about 6 months before or something like that, they had moved down there, or a little bit before that.
Okay, now help me understand this, right? And I only ask this for context sake.
Mm-hmm.
Did the AUB have branches down there in Arizona where they were at? Oh, okay. All right.
They had one in Surprise, Arizona.
Okay.
It was mainly Mexican people that came up from the colony.
Gotcha. 10-4. Okay.
But Brother Ted Jessup moved to Mesa, Arizona for a job opportunity was one thing, and he also felt impressed to be there.
Okay. So at this time, when everybody's going down, with the exception of Joe, obviously, is everybody still in reasonably good standing with the AU with the Allred group at that point?
When you say everyone, the only person that moved down at the time was Ted and his family.
No, I mean at the time of this solemn assembly.
That's what I mean.
Okay.
Because everyone else that attended that was still living in Utah.
Okay, but everyone that attended that were they still in good terms with the Allred group?
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay. All right.
This would have been in the spring of '94.
Okay.
But solemn assembly, Brother Joe called. We were there to meet on a weekend. The first day that we arrived was just basically visiting, you know, having dinner, visiting, talking, but told we're going to wake up really early in the morning, like 3 or 4 in the morning. And we expect you to be dressed in your robes. Then we're going to have a solemn assembly where we're going to do a sacramental feast where they serve plenty of bread and plenty of wine. And Brother Joe conducted the meeting. It was kind of, you could say, almost dual conducted with Ted Jessup and Brother Joe. It was Ted Jessup kind of starting it up and then Brother Joe taking it over. But I remember one of the first things he did is he rehearsed all of the signs and tokens.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, the signs and penalties and everything, and an explanation. And then he began to talk about how he said that after the accusations and him being dropped by the council, that he was resigned to the idea of just living out the rest of his life and going home.
Mm.
Allowing the group to continue doing what they're doing without him. That he's pretty at peace with that. And he says he was at peace with that until he heard rumors of Brother Owen going back on the temple work.
So that really bugged Joe.
Yes. And then he told us why it bugged him, because at the time he shared with all of us there a revelation that the council had received in 1981. Now, going back to 1992, Bill Baird shared that same revelation with me.
Okay.
So it wasn't new to me, but it was new to some of the men there.
So it was a second witness to you and the first time from most of the other guys.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the contents of that revelation?
I'm going to paraphrase it to the best of my memory. You for a copy of it, Moroni Jessup, I'm sure, has a copy of it. So you could go back to it and fact check me on that.
No, yeah.
But basically, if I recall, this is what the content of it says. This is the word of the Lord unto you, brethren in the priesthood council. It is in regards to, it says in regards to the ordinances of my house. It is your basically it is your responsibility and duty to keep alive all the laws and ordinances of the gospel, including all the ordinances of my house, which I can no longer accept in my house.
Right.
Do not become proud in your callings, lest you be destroyed in the spirit. Approach me often dressed in the robes of the holy priesthood, and I will answer all of your righteous questions. Even so, I am Jesus Christ, who was crucified for the sins of the world. Amen. Now, let me ask you, how do you interpret that?
That the Lord's been waiting a while for somebody to come.
I forgot to mention, I have waited long for you to approach me in this manner.
Right. Yep.
I forgot to mention that.
Yep. He's been waiting, right? He's been wanting somebody to come ask about these things. And now that they have went and asked about it, the Lord's telling them, come back in your robes and continue to ask these questions, and I'll reveal these things to you.
But what do you get from the very first part? It is your duty and responsibility to do what? Keep alive all the laws and ordinances of my gospel, including all the ordinances of my house.
And the Mexico temple wasn't built at that time, right?
No,
So
neither was the one they have in Bluffdale.
To me, that is a mandate to get started. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's time to go forward with temple work.
Now, notice how he said is your duty and responsibility. And if I recall, but don't hold me to this, I think it said privilege too. But don't hold me to that one.
Sure.
But anyway, he reiterated that to us, saying that the Lord, and he says that's why he started pushing for the building of a temple.
So Joe was the one that started the push for the building of a temple?
It was him and Bill Baird.
Okay. And was Bill Baird the gentleman from England?
No.
Okay. I think it's someone else.
No, Bill Baird lived in Centerville.
Okay.
Centerville, Utah. And if I recall, Bill Baird had been a worker in the temple in the church at one point.
Okay.
And he converted to fundamentalism.
Right.
But anyway, so the next thing I can say here is he basically reiterated at that solemn assembly, he reiterated what he had been talking with Moroni and I privately. Just elaborated on it.
Right.
And he had his sons. He had a couple of sons there, Rob Thompson, Ken Thompson, Dennis Thompson were there. And he would have them get up and do explanations.
Right.
And they were really good at it. You could tell he did his homework in teaching his boys.
Right.
And I remember some of the other brethren that were there were so blown away. Wow, that was heavy stuff. I never knew. And what I found interesting is these guys had been in the All Red group since either the 60s and 70s.
Right.
And a lot of this was new to them.
Right.
Moroni and I were just newbies.
Right.
And we were already introduced into a lot of this stuff.
Right.
Even before them.
Right.
Which I always found serendipitous.
Yeah.
And I've often wondered why. Why was I so fresh in the group and I'm drawn into this
Right.
stuff, heavy stuff.
Right.
Anyway, that's for the Lord to answer. I don't know his reasons behind it. But because I often felt like I had to pay my dues in this group before a lot,
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, that was he made a statement that he said, "Brethren, I don't want to sound." He says, "I don't want to sound overly presumptuous in making this statement." He says, "But I feel that the fate of the world lies with me at this moment."
So he's feeling the pressure to magnify that calling, so to
Right.
speak, by making sure that that authority
And
gets
he says,
passed along to somebody worthy.
right, he says, the church is not perpetuating this amongst, it says, to my knowledge, if any, it's only among general authorities. Will we perpetuate it?
Let's see.
He says, will be perpetuated. And up to now, he says, I was more than content with just living out the rest of my life knowing that I did the best I could and going back home and meeting my maker. But when I heard word that Brother Owen was taking backward steps on temple work and these other things,
After the revelation.
yeah, he says, I feel like I have no choice but
Okay.
to see to it that this work continues. Whether Owen and the council will perpetuate this, I don't know. But he says, I don't have confidence that they will.
Right.
Now, he talked about the importance of that. He didn't offer us our ordinances at that time.
Right.
Well, the meeting, several people spoke. Brother Ted was very gregarious in his talks and very forthright that this is something we have to, brethren, can we back Brother Joe on this? He was talking that way. And I didn't know enough to really
Understand what's
understand.
happening. Yeah.
Yeah. But I remember thinking the spirit behind Brother Joe is very strong and feels really good to me.
Right.
And someone said, well, maybe we should. Someone said, what about the high baptism? Is that something that people are? And Brother Joe took that as an opportunity to say, can you all get behind receiving the high baptism? And all of us said yes. He goes, well, good, we can do that much.
Wow.
And then Brother Ted got on the following day. Brother Ted got on the phone with his, I don't know if it was a brother-in-law or a cousin of his wife. It's either a brother or a cousin or something, like a family member of his wife on his Mexican, his wife is Mexican, and it was,
Right.
well, he happened to have a swimming pool in his backyard,
Okay.
and he was able to
Arrange it.
arrange it. And so all of us got our high baptism in the swimming pool in Mesa, Arizona in 1994.
Wow.
But anyway, after the meeting, I remember we had some leisure time, and then my brother came by to visit with me. My brother George, who lived in Mesa,
Mm-hmm.
and he came by for a quick visit, and then he left. And my brother Gary came by too. And I remember some of the women that were there saying my brothers were very good looking.
Right.
But anyway, that has nothing to do with anything. And then we drove back to Utah. And I have to say that some of us were in the station wagon, and the others, Joe Thompson and his sons, were in a little car. I don't know if it was a Datsun or a Toyota, or it was one of those little
Right.
cars. And we caravan back to Utah, and we had around the anniversary of that first one, we had another one, 1995. And but anyway, that kind of gets off topic now.
Okay.
So ask me more questions.
Okay. So this meeting happens. what where does you and Joe's relationship go from here? Right? Because now you're like, look, I can already tell where this is going, right? This is the beginnings of another group
Hmm.
that's about to take shape. Did you recognize it as such at that time?
It was a possibility in my mind, yes.
Okay. So as you go back now, you're going to attempt to go back to the AUB like everything's normal, I assume, right?
I'd like to say something to that effect.
Okay.
Brother Joe advised us not to willfully break away from the AUB,
Okay. All right.
which is similar to AUB used to advise us not to antagonize the church
Right.
or to remain as faithful as we could.
Right. Right. So you're going to go back to the AUB. Try to go on like nothing's happened. Where does Joe take things next, and then what happens to this small group of people?
Okay. After the 94 meeting that we had in Mesa, the only one that I believe had enough sense to catch on to what Brother Joe was trying to do at that first meeting there was Ted Jessup. Ted Jessup called Brother Joe and directly asked him if he could get the fullness of priesthood, aka the second anointing. And Brother Joe prayed about it and then made the arrangement. Now, it happened, it was a couple months later, I believe. I mean, I don't even know if it was a couple months. I'd have to talk to Moroni to get the chronology, because we had this meeting in April, and it was after that. At this time, Moroni was working with me. I was in uh, my second year of doing sighting,
Okay.
which, by the way, Rob Hender, the one I mentioned earlier, he's the one that brought me into the trade,
Okay. Gotcha.
and I was still working with him. He was It was his company, and I was one of the crew guys.
Right.
Well, he gave me my own crew, and I hired Moroni Jessup to work with me,
Okay.
and he came in as a cutter. And I remember we were on a job, and it was kind of a gloomy day, rainy, gloomy day. And Moroni's grandfather-in-law, Mr. Makagi, he's a Japanese man. He had a house in Draper, and he had a Japanese apple orchard or Japanese pear orchard. And he says, why don't we go there for lunch? No, it wasn't that. We took lunch and we got to talking about things. And he said, I feel impressed that we have to go pray. I says, where are we going to do that? And he says, well, we can go in the basement of my grandfather-in-law's house. So we went there, and I think he was actually living there at the time, him and his wife.
Okay.
So we went there, and we went down in the basement, and we offered up some prayers in the true order.
Right.
Now, of course, we weren't dressed in our robes,
Sure.
but we both wore the garment, and we understood that was enough to do that.
Right.
And I remember I was overcome with a very strong premonition. And I said to Moroni, I feel by the Spirit that your dad has received something very special. I don't know what it is,
Hmm.
but I feel that he's received something very special. Really? He says, yes, I feel it very strong. Well, after work, when we went back home, no, he wasn't living there anymore. He was living in my place. I had a house in Kearns,
Okay.
and I was living with his brother Carlos at the time. And Moroni and his brother Tony moved in. It was kind of a big enough house that it could have all of us there. And when we got home, guess who was there visiting from Mesa?
Yeah.
Brother Ted and his wife. And they were dressed in white clothing.
Hmm. Wow.
So when we got there, Moroni and I looked at each other, and we both knew what happened.
Yeah.
Brother Ted didn't have to tell us a word. We got a testimony of it.
Right.
And so to me, it was better that we found out that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So at this point, how much longer does Ted live? I'm not Ted, excuse me. Joe live after this?
After this, 2 more years.
2 more years.
He died in 96.
What are those 2 years filled with at this point?
Well, they're filled with Brother Joe is not doing much himself because
Sure.
he's fairly ill.
Yeah.
And he's bedbound an awful lot. I do see him on occasion at, more gatherings like blessing of a baby or somebody's birthday party or something like that. I'll see him at a gathering like that, but for the most part, I don't see him in a religious setting.
Right.
He's generally at home, and I go visit from time to time. I do remember him having concerns with the way Brother Ted wants to proceed with things. Because Brother Ted was a missionary in the LDS Church, and he thought he could do things the way you did it in the LDS Church.
Mm,
And Brother Joe was trying to let him know this is a different animal.
right.
This takes a different approach. But anyway, aside from that, and him encouraging us to gather in the true order of prayer and stuff like that, not much is happening.
Okay.
What I do know is that in that before he died, Brother Ted ordained Mel Sullivan.
Okay. All right.
And Brother Ted and Mel Sullivan, Brother Ted, he acquired some property in northern Arizona, near a town called Concho, Arizona. And he wants to label it as a gathering spot where we can proceed to build a temple.
Okay.
So that they can continue working.
So it seems like Ted really caught Joe's vision there a little
Mhm.
bit. Okay.
Now, I do both Brother Mel and Brother Ted around that before Brother Joe died. I think they were both kicked out of the All Red group
Okay.
by that time. I hadn't because I wasn't as vocal as they were.
Right.
But Brother Mel was instrumental and had a hand in a letter that was delivered to everyone in the AUB, questioning the way they dealt with Joe Thompson, because it didn't follow the protocol that we're
Right.
told to should follow if someone is serious charges are brought against people. And it was a letter mainly dealing with that.
Mm.
And I know some of the people who were in that letter, or who contributed to that letter.
Right.
I didn't write anything on that letter, but I made a statement that was quoted in that letter. So
Okay.
you could say I made a contribution too,
Sure.
like a sentence or two.
Sure.
But anyway, but Brother Mel also wrote a private letter to Brother Owen, questioning some of these things and stating him, I support you in your calling and all this other stuff, but I'd like some answers on this. And for his troubles, he got kicked out of the group.
Right.
And I remember the letter was read out loud in one of the priesthood meetings, and they were asking, "Is anybody here, have anything to do with this letter and this and that and the other?" And I was hearing a lot of the stirrings, and like a fool, I was going to raise my hand and say I had anything to do with it. I really didn't, but I was aware of who
Well,
did.
you got two sentences in there, Sean.
Yeah. But anyway, like a fool, I was going to rat anybody out or anything.
Right.
And quite frankly, they didn't even address the content of the letter. They just started referring to it as accusing of the brethren and all this other stuff. And it was a total straw man.
Right.
But anyway, so what I'm showing here is kind of in a odd sort of way. I'm showing you kind of how keys were passed on.
Yes. Yes, I'm picking that up.
From Joseph Musser to Joe Thompson to Ted Jessup.
Yes.
Mel Sullivan. But anyway, the legitimacy of those ordinations all ties into Joseph Musser.
Right. Yep. It can all be traced back to Musser. Yeah.
Right. Now there are people that that would challenge that notion. People says that those were never passed on and they haven't seen enough evidence of it and all this and the other, and I can understand that.
Sure.
But there was things said to me in regards to it that, to me, settled the issue that he did. And And another argument that's made is maybe he wasn't in his right mind when he did it and all that. But to me, that's a little immaterial. It either happened or it didn't.
Right, right. Well, if you, I'm gonna hold off on that one for a hot
Okay.
minute.
That's just my own personal
Yeah,
opinion.
no, I get it, and it's valid, right? I do. I think it's valid. So we see the secession of those keys start to happen, right? Musser, Rulon Allred, Joe Thompson, Ted Jessup, and Mel Sullivan to this point. So, and I guess that's kind of the big thing that we're at this point. So I want to pause here for a second. I want to take a break, and then when we come back, I want to talk about where you were when you found out that Joe Thompson had passed on. And then I want to follow those keys up to the present day, right?
Okay.
Without, I don't mind naming names of people who'd had it who've maybe passed on. Probably want to stay away from anyone who holds them currently. We can refer in generalities, but for the sake of somebody else's privacy, I don't want to out them. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
All right, cool. Let's do that. So, at what point, like, at some point, we know Joe passes. Where were you when he passed?
When he passed away, if I recall, it was sometime in the spring or maybe early summer of 1996. I can't remember the exact date that he passed. But I was standing on a plank in drizzly rain, installing softened fascia in the backyard of a house in Riverton.
Mm.
And his son, I believe it was his son, yeah, Kurt Thompson, was working with me when I got a call from his daughter, Marianne, who's Marianne Watson, telling me that her father passed away. I was on a cell phone,
Right.
the kind they used to have back in the 90s.
The brick.
Yeah, 90. Well, it wasn't quite the brick. It was a little bit more modern looking than that, but 1996.
Still had to pull up the antenna.
Well, it had an antenna on it.
Okay. All right. Gotcha.
One of those fat antennas.
Yeah. And so, like, what at that time are you still part of the AUB? Are you still attending with the AUB? What was the general consensus like around, the scuttlebutt, if you will, around the AUB about his passing? Like, is anyone bringing it up or talking about it, or?
I have to admit that during that time I wasn't what you would call completely active.
Right. I get you.
I was still quasi active.
It gets a little hard, right? When you start going down a different path, it gets a little hard to want to be there consistently. I get that.
My main thing was they really started pushing support for Brother Owen on a one-man basis.
Right.
That I didn't agree with.
Right.
And so it was beyond Joe.
Right.
Beyond Joe Thompson with that issue.
Yeah.
But anyway, I have to say that at Brother Joe's funeral, something happened no, it wasn't his funeral. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Oh. Let me backtrack. There was a man by the name of Ken Jepson. And Ken Jepson was a good friend of Sean Murphy, or Steve Murphy.
Okay.
And Steve Murphy was adamant about Joe being a wicked man. And that was what Ken Jepson was formulating in his mind until he decided to go talk to Joe himself. Then he totally changed his tune about Joe. I attended an elders meeting, and it was kind of a special meeting because we had as guests Lemoyne Jensen. Lemoyne Jensen was there, as well as David Watson, who were members of the council, and they were attending our meeting. Well, at that meeting, the elders quorum president kind of opened the meeting for people to get up and bear their testimonies. And there was a couple of men that got up to bear their testimonies, and they were Paul Maycock, Ondi Allred, and Rob Hender. And they all got up and basically gave the same kind of testimony, that I testify that Brother Owen is the man who holds the keys. That was the
Mm-hmm.
gist of all three of theirs. But they all gave a little story into it.
Right.
And then Ken Jebsen got up to talk. And this I will never forget because it was epic. But Brother Ken Jebsen gets up. Now, to describe Brother Ken Jebsen, he had a good singing voice. It's a good singing voice, and he sounded a lot like John Denver. And he actually sang a lot of John Denver songs. So that kind of gives you a little bit of the sound of his voice as a
Right.
reference. But anyway, he gets up to talk and he says, and he starts by saying, Brother Paul, I liked what you said about this, and that. Brother Ondai, I liked about what you said, this, and that. And Brother Rob Hender, I like what you said about this, and that. He says, but brethren, let's get serious. You bear your testimony. You make it sound like it's hard for you to get up and bear your testimony about Brother Owen in this setting. Says, would you have the courage to get up? You act as though it takes courage to do so here in this group of people. Would you have the courage to get up in an LDS ward meeting and say the things you've said today?
Ooh.
And he says, well, I too am going to bear my testimony.
Oh boy.
And he says, brethren, I bear my testimony that the priesthood that Brother Owen has. Then he points to that Brother Lemoyne has, and that Brother David Watson has. I bear my solemn testimony to you that Joseph Thompson has that same priesthood, and no, brother, and he's not a child molester.
Oh boy. Ooh.
And I can also bear testimony to you that the way he's been dealt with is unrighteous.
Wow.
And at that point, the Elders Quorum president said, Brother Jepsen, would you sit down? And he says, I've said my piece. And he sat down. Elders Quorum president then says, I would like to now call on Brother Lemoyne Jensen to rebut what's been said here today. Now, when Brother Ken Jepsen was talking, there was a young man that got up and left the meeting. Offended. No, it was a couple of them. Walked out in protest. And then Brother Lemoyne gets up and he says, I wish I could comment on the beautiful testimonies we heard here today. Instead, I am forced to rebut. And what I can say is, Brother Jepsen, you don't know what you're talking about. When these allegations were brought up to Brother Joe, he swore. He swore, brethren. And he says, that's all I have. And he says, do you believe that's the way a man of God would respond?
Sometimes.
And then he said, and basically he finished his remarks. And I remember thinking to myself, that's it? That's the response?
Right.
Is that Brother Joe swore?
Right.
It's like, oh, that's good news. My daughters are accusing me of something very heinous.
Right.
I think I'd be upset too.
Yeah.
Especially if it wasn't true.
Absolutely.
But anyway, this is where I think I made myself known to a lot of people, because I could see that Brother Ken Jepsen was feeling very alone at that moment. I walked up to him to shake his hand and I said, thank you. We needed to hear that. And I made sure everybody within eyesight and earshot heard what I said and saw what I did.
Right. That was kind of the end, probably close to the end at that point.
Well, Ken Jepsen, it wasn't close to the end. It was still, because Joe Thompson died in 96 and Brother Ken died before he did
Okay.
by an unfortunate accident when he went camping with his family. He went camping with his family and an old tree fell on them and crushed him to death.
Oh, jeez.
And as you would expect, people blamed that on his stance.
Right.
Which I thought was it's a very insensitive thing to say.
Right.
But anyway, this brings me to Ken Jepsen's funeral. I attended his funeral, and a lot of people in the group did, on both sides of this issue. Ken Jepson's father was still in the LDS mainstream church, and he gave a eulogy of his son. And he was talking about how I didn't always see eye to eye with my son, but my son has always been a good man. And apparently I didn't know how good he was until lately, as I've begun to meet the people that he interacted with. And he says, but the thing that touched me the most is when I was in the process of looking for a coffin for my son, the Thompson family said, no, we have a coffin that we'd like to donate. That was handcrafted. And I was informed that it was made for Joe Thompson.
Hmm.
And he said the coffin he had intended for himself, he wanted me to have for my son. And he said, and it reminded me of when Christ was entombed. He was entombed in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea.
Right.
And he says, so I want to say I am very thankful to God that we have a modern day Joseph of Arimathea. His name is Joseph of Harriman.
Oh, wow. That had to make a few people start to shift uncomfortably at that funeral.
And then he said, I can't believe, he says, that people would calumnize the name of such a good man.
Mm.
And there were many there who did in that congregation.
Wow.
And he said it as a big
A
stinging rebuke.
Yep.
And they couldn't say anything about it because it's at this guy's funeral.
Right. So after Joe passed, what happens to this group of people that he has started to work with, right? Ed Jessup, you, Moroni. Who's the other man?
Mel Sullivan?
Mel Sullivan. Thank you. What happens to this group of folks? What ends up?
Well, Moroni ends up moving down there to join his dad. And at first he moves to Mesa because they're living in Mesa. And I have to say that a bunch of us are a bunch of greenhorns on how to do anything.
Sure, sure. How old are you at this time?
94, I was 27.
Okay.
Which is how old I was when I received the
High baptism.
And so this all happens when I'm 27, 28, 29, 30, around those.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest, when I didn't really like Brother Ted Jessup's approach. I believe it was a little bit too bull in the china closet.
Right.
And criticism of it was seen as being kind of cowardly or heel biting. And I don't think that you could describe me or Brother Joe as cowards in any way or anything like that. It's just at times we've learned that you got to have some prudence in how you go about things. Admittedly, I was young, and so some of these older guys looked at me as, well, we like you and all, but you're young yet.
Right. You're still relegated to the kids' table at Thanksgiving.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
Not entirely, and it wouldn't be fair for me to entirely say that. I think they gave me plenty of respect considering my age.
Sure.
But nevertheless, some of that still played into it. But for as young as I was, I had a lot of experience already with real world things.
Yep.
And but anyway, like I mentioned before, there was almost a schism there with Brother Joe's sons and Ted and Mel and those guys over the way they're going about things. And I played an important role in keeping that from happening.
Right. Keeping everybody together.
Yeah. And I had a talk with Joe over this, and Joe, I have to say this, he thought that my counsel on it was sound, and he listened to it, which I remember thinking, I was surprised that he would be that humble to accept the counseling of a upstart like myself,
Right.
you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Shows a lot of willingness to listen.
Right. And that's one thing I can tell you about Joe. He was a dang good listener.
Right.
So much so that at times you thought that he wasn't, because of the fact that he remained quiet for so long without responding. But he told me the reason he did that is because he was always careful how he answered any questions. He didn't want to, he wanted to be very careful not to be misunderstood.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So this group goes down to Concho eventually, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you end up moving down there too?
Not till actually quite a bit later. Oh, in '99, this brings me to a subject that I'm very uncomfortable talking about. In '99, I lost my family.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, nothing was holding me in Utah, so I went down there. And doesn't mean that I agreed with every little thing that they were about or anything like that, but it's the only place I could see myself going where I was still welcome.
I understand.
And and quite frankly, up in Utah, of those of us that were looking at being more prudent, inaction became kind of a big thing. And I'm not saying that Brother Joe was party to that, because he had action
Mm-hmm.
up until he died, to the best that he could. But among his children and all that, they were very hesitant to do anything. And I said to myself, well, I may not agree with Brother Ted's direction altogether, but he's at least doing something.
Doing something.
Right.
Yeah.
And I felt maybe I can go down there, and if I disagree with something, I can voice it, and maybe we can come to some sort of agreement on how to proceed in a better way or whatever. But also emotionally, I couldn't stay where I was anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I had to leave. And Paul Thompson and Jonathan Thompson went with me. They drove me down there, and we pulled my little truck with one of those rent
Car dollies.
car dollies you can rent, and what was remaining of my belongings and tools and stuff I took with me. And they told me I was welcome to be there and that I could stay with them. And so I kind of jumped between Brother Ted's, Brother Mel's, Brother Verone's places. But I ended up staying at Brother Mel's more often than not, because Brother Mel lived in town, in the town of Concho, and Moroni and Ted lived on the land, is how they used to refer to it, off grid.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to go to work and stuff, and it was easier for me to go from there.
Oh, I see.
But anyway, and so this went on for, from I would say around September of '99 all the way to mid-December of 2000. So how much time is that?
What was
About a
this?
year and a half.
Yeah. Yep.
Which is around the time I married my third wife, my present wife, who's Clara.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved to Cedar City for a spell, because she was still going to what do you call it? Southern Utah University.
Okay. Yep. SUU.
SUU, yeah. And so she still, hadn't finished what she was doing there. She ended up getting an associate's degree. And so I lived there for a while, and in 2003 we moved back to Concho. And actively started working with the brethren there. And for a time there, we were growing. We seemed to have a good spirit about us. And then we had a controversy that came around 2006, 2007, and we endured a split over that. And
I think that's the same split Moroni talked about on
yes,
his first podcast with me.
yes. And Moroni ended up on the same side of that split. And as time went on, um, it seemed like our work was stagnating quite a bit. And I didn't, obviously, I wasn't welcome on the other side unless I was going to see eye to eye with a lot of things. But on our side, we weren't really doing much. We started to, but then there was a lot of hesitancy, and it just turned into we were just having Sunday school meeting. That's about it, you know. And very occasionally we would have some ordinance work. Generally when we had a convert that would come around and wanted this work done. And ironically, a member of the other side had also been ordained by Ted. And he ended up, you know, splitting ways from that side of the group, and he moved to Missouri. Happened to be my brother-in-law,
Robert Lefevre, right?
Robert Lefevre. And I have to say this outright, is him and I were on separate camps here. But I do believe that the spirit of his calling fell upon him. And he began to actively do more work over here in Missouri. And in the process, he invited me. I was reluctant at first and everything, but I just, you know, I always like to give the benefit of the doubt. And I do believe people can change for the better. And I'm not saying that he was a bad man or anything like that. We just didn't see eye to eye. And I don't think that he viewed me with too much approval. But he came out to Missouri and he started to work among the brethren out here where I currently live. And then he moved up to Pattonsburg, and he had bought an old church there in Pattonsburg, Missouri. And he got a really good deal on it because it was in the part of Pattonsburg that had been largely abandoned since the floods of 1993. And he got a church for, I think, $10,000.
Wow.
And it was a good sized church, and he worked it into a functioning endowment house. He called it a temple, and that's an item you know, I kind of disagreed with him on, but whatever he wants to call it is fine by me. But anyway, and he did some work there, and he actually offered me the completion of my higher ordinances, which was very, very ironic, because him and I were completely on opposite views in some way. And I thought that the Lord had an interesting sense of humor, you know, because I have to admit, I toyed with the idea of rejecting the offer based on that. And I made a condition with I said to the Lord, one way I'll know it comes from you is that there will be no restrictions placed on me as a condition. And as soon as I finished saying that prayer, I got another phone call from him, and he says, I don't know why I'm saying this to you, but if you accept what I'm offering, it'll be without any restriction.
Whew. There's your sign.
Right. And so that's how it comes down to me.
Okay. And so, and correct me if I'm wrong, Robert then goes along to pass that authority on to the folks who would build the temple here in Missouri.
Yes.
Right. So we can trace that priesthood back from the folks that are here now in Missouri that have built the temple, back to Robert Lefevre, back to Mel Sullivan or Ted Jessup, back to Joseph Thompson, back to
Joseph Musser, who can then trace it back to Lorenzo Stone.
Yep, and all the way back.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting to me, and this was one of the things that I did notice, right? And I am going to make a statement here, and I'm not casting dispersion on anybody. But there does seem to be a pattern that when the Lord is involved with a people, a temple is usually short to follow.
Right.
We can see that through the history. And I understand that it's a Herculean effort. But nonetheless, I do find it somewhat interesting that every place that Thompson line lands, temple work seems to be following right behind it, right? And we don't have to call it the Thompson line. We can call it the Musser line or whatever. But
Right.
any place this priesthood goes, temple work seems to follow shortly thereafter. And it's interesting that that seems to be some of the fruit there that is bore from this. Um, as we've talked about all this now, it's an interesting line in that it doesn't have a lot of um, hierarchy to it, right? Most of the groups that I know that have had this have been somewhat I don't want to say disorganized, but maybe it's just the best word because what's the opposite of organization?
Loosely
Disorganized.
organized.
Loosely organized. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. There's not a lot of that organization. I think that's probably by design, but nonetheless, it does seem to be every place this priesthood lands, temple work is following shortly behind it. That seems to be something that you can't get away from.
I will say something here though, because I'm sure critics will say this,
Mm-hmm.
and that is from the period of, the Woolies and that work all the way to the 1980s, they didn't have temple work in
Mm-hmm.
fundamentalism. But the caveat is that they believe that the church is doing it properly.
Right.
And under that, they were saying, our commission has been to keep plural marriage alive.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever the church is able and willing to do, we fully support. And they were careful to say, we're not a separate church.
Mm-hmm.
They were very careful to say that. And so that's, kind of introduces a little bit of context to that condition.
Well, I think we have to look at what the promises that were made, right? When Musser and those proto fundamentalists, a few of them go into the Salt Lake Temple and they